Hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Silverman. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing at Pipe 17, and welcome to our webinar, From Chaos to Control, Surviving the 2025 Tariff Wars. We're joined by an esteemed panel of guests, including Mo Afshar, the CEO of Pipe 17, Aaron Alpeter, the founder of izba, Maya Benson, Chief Business Officer at FlavorCloud, and Kevin Knoll, Senior Vice President of Supply Chain at Aterian. Just a couple of quick announcements and a quick update on Pipe 17 before we get going. This is part of our series that we're launching regarding the supply chain success in 2025 around tariffs. We have a new playbook and an ebook that's launched today as well. So you can come to our website at pipe17.com to download the ebook and get all the additional insights from that piece of work. Also, I'll be sending out the ebook for you all, including a recording of this session after the session as well. Awesome. So let's get going. Just a quick note about Pipe 17. And we live in the space of commerce technology, and the reality that is that commerce technology and commerce today is actually quite dynamic and complex. Greater complexity lives in our ecosystem. There's greater uncertainty as we're here today discussing tariffs. There's an expansion of selling channels and more sellers. And of course, customer expectations are much, much higher. So all of this combining together to create a really complex ecosystem for both technologists as well as shoppers as well. And if we think about the journey of sort of operations or order operations or just commerce in general, the industry has really solved this front end challenge of providing a great experience, an amazing website, both marketplaces for D2C and B2B, great tools for listing products, and a variety of selling channels and points of sale. So the industry has been focused quite a bit on that. The challenge lives below that iceberg. The areas that are not solved are these order management or order operations challenges. So ERP integrations or an explosion of 3PLs, which are definitely part of this narrative around mitigating taxes, inventory visibility and reporting, compliance, more shippers and selling channels, and of course the tariff chaos that we're in today. So we're exploring sort of this bottom half of the iceberg today on how to optimize order management and order operations. And if you're from a digitally native brand, the order management capabilities are quite robust but pretty rigid. And very few brands that we speak with actually are looking to replace their order management. They want all of the order management capabilities without an order management system, what we're hearing in the market as an un-OMS. And so enter Pipe 17. And so we provide AI-powered order operation solutions for modern merchants, wholesalers, and fulfillment service providers. We combine AI-powered order orchestration and back-office visibility that's powered by a partner network of more than 300 selling, fulfillment, and back-office partners. Basically, commerce connectivity and order flow in one solution. And these are the advantages that you see here: greater agility in terms of setting up your systems, not just having a single source of truth, but having all of your systems be in sync and having all of your systems being a source of truthful information and inventory. On the back end, having greater control, less requirements for developer-centric solutions and more control for operators to manage their order flows. And because of all of this, it lowers the overall cost of the solution and your order operations in general. And then if you're looking to learn more about Pipe 17, visit us on our website, pipe17.com. You can reach out to me or anyone from the team here, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Okay, so with that, let's get rolling. Let me start to invite the folks in our panel to the stage. Welcome, Mo. Let's see, we have a few more here. And I think there's one more. I guess that's all. Everyone's here. Okay, I'm going to go in the background. Enjoy your show.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Big welcome from me Mo at Pipe 17. Before I introduce the panelists, love to kind of set the context a little bit on what we're doing here, which is we've got an esteemed group of people who are industry folks who are living with the reality of tariffs every day. And that reality has been made even more acute since April 2nd and May 12th and whatever happens next. And, we're not going to discuss many of the macro trends around US, China and what's happening there and kind of the whole trade imbalance and tax cuts and other things, which all, of course, play into the tariff strategy overall. But it's going to be an amazing panel and you're going to have very tangible insights from experts that hopefully will give each of you things that you can take away and do differently that you may not be thinking about today, or just validate the things you're thinking about and kind of figure out how well they work. So with that, I'm going to ask each participant to introduce themselves. So Maya Benson, welcome.
Hi, Mo. Thanks so much. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Maya, as well. Go ahead, tell us a little bit about
Maya Benson. Yes, thank you. Chief Business Officer of FlavorCloud. FlavorCloud helps brands and merchants move parcel through pallet orders around the globe, so cross-border, via 300 carriers, so multi-carrier network, air and ground. And we handle all the things. So full classification and estimation, full customs compliance, full in-country compliance, paying all the appropriate sales tax and import tax. And we've been doing this for about 6 to 7 years. So thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Great to have you here. Aaron Alpeter.
Yeah, Mo, thanks for having me.
No introduction, but I'm still going to ask you for an introduction.
Happy to be here. So my name's Aaron Alpeter. I'm the founder of the izba Group. We've got 3 companies that make up the izba Group, really all focused on helping founders to start, scale, and exit their businesses. The first one is izba Consulting. It's an end-to-end supply chain consultancy that really helps brands prepare to exit and helps acquirers integrate those acquisitions. The second is Sourcify, which has been very, very busy with all the tariffs. Essentially, what Sourcify does is helps brands lower their COGS. We've got a network of several thousand factories all around the world. We basically help people, figure out where they want to produce if they can't produce in China anymore. And then last but not least is Slotted, which helps brands build a better fulfillment RFP.
Fantastic. Well, great. Well, we need all of those things. So, Kevin, welcome.
Thank you, Mo. Very honored to be here with esteemed colleagues and talking about a very important topic. So I'm SVP of Global Supply Chain at Aterian. Aterian is a multi-brand, omni-channel, tech-enabled CPG company. Think of us as an Amazon aggregator type of company. So, one of the things that we've done well is build a mini supply chain around our specific brands and products that perform at a very high level. And then we partner with Mo's company to do a lot of that functionality. So anyway, very honored to be here and looking forward to the topics.
Fantastic. Before we dive in, Kevin said something to me a few weeks ago that I want him to share, which is, Kevin, how many containers do you have on the water at any one time?
Depending on the month, we'll have anywhere from 50 to 100 containers on the water. It's a lot of volume.
A lot of logistics to deal with. So with that, I'd like to open up the panel initially, and Maya, maybe to you first, which is, how do we get here? We thought we'd been through the COVID thing and the post-COVID hangover, and things were looking great going into this year, and everybody was positive, and businesses were starting to roar back. What's been happening?
Yeah, it feels like a massive change like COVID did in 2020. Aaron, if you could kindly throw up, we've got a visual here. The single answer to your question, Mo, is Trump, right? So starting in December, right before Christmas, for those of us that are nerdy and we're paying attention, thank you. Mexico actually tried to get in front of, pre-negotiate, if you will, with Trump coming into office by levering tariffs on apparel imports coming into Mexico. So Mexico for a long time had been an access point, kind of a backdoor, if you will, for moving product from wherever, Asia, through Mexico, and then capitalizing on the 321 backdoor into the States for last mile. So that was the first tip that Trump coming, even before he was sworn in to office, would make all of our lives very dynamic to date. After that, I think we remember kind of the highlights together that have really affected our e-commerce shared space, right? So US first deployed 25% import tariffs on made in Mexico and Canada, with Canada quickly reciprocating with made in the USA tariffs going into Canada of 25%. That's actually had impact on commerce. We've got some data that showcases that. You might remember about 2 weeks later, he actually came out and he killed 321 for Mexico and Canada. And then before the date of March 4th, when it was going to be implemented, he actually stayed it. So there was a quick heart attack for many of us. I think it was like a Friday and Saturday where that was then stayed. The big next really milestone was Liberation Day. We all lived through that together in the eye chart with this variable, 10 to, over 60% tariffs levied against different countries. Then you had China retaliate. We officially killed 321 for made in China starting in May. And then last but certainly not least, just about 2 weeks ago, we did get a 90-day deal reprieve whereby that minimum 145% tariff on made in China, remember that it includes Hong Kong and Macau as well, went down to a minimum of 30. So how we got here is Trump coming into office. The ball started rolling before he even was sworn in. And that's chapter 1 or Q1, Q2, H1 2025 summary today.
Well, that's it's hard to believe. It's only been a few months, right? I mean, it's barely been like 8-10 weeks, and so much has changed. So, Aaron, you've obviously been in the thick of it with your businesses as well. Give us a sense of how it's been for you as you've been listening to the partners that you work with and the businesses that you partner with.
Yeah, if you could believe it, I didn't have gray hair before all this happened, but no, I can't believe it's only been 5 months since all that happened, but really just over 100 days since Trump was sworn in for the second time. I think that I agree with everything you said, Maya. I would also just context that I think Trump is the symptom, but there's a much broader change that's happening that's leading us to where we are today. And if you look at this, there was a grand bargain that both sides of the political aisle looked at. They said free trade is what we want. We were looking at lowering tariffs across the board. And the idea was that if we had more people that we were trading with, that they would be more like the U.S. And so that was a way to export democracy and Western values and things like that. That hasn't played out the way that was expected. I think that it's not political at this point, but the amount of factory jobs or types of jobs that have gone overseas is much higher than what came back, right? And it's been an unequal benefit across the economy that way. And so I think that Trump's first election in 2016 was the first milestone to say that this framework that's existed for the previous 30 years is finally shattered and it's going to be different. But if it had only been a Trump thing, we would have expected that Biden would have walked back all the tariffs, all the things that were there. And he actually kept them in place or raised them as it went through. And so what you see is this coalescing around both left and right, looking at saying, let's rethink our rules of the road, right? I think that the important thing to think about when it comes to tariffs or just these sorts of non-governmental things in general is that government's role is to set the rules of the road, and our job as operators is to work within them, work around them. And there has been a very sudden change, a very dramatic change with Trump 2.0, where a lot of rules got changed in a very dramatic way in a very short period of time. But the overall trend, if you were going to zoom out and say, do we think in 10 years we'll be more integrated or less integrated? I think everything points to less integrated, with China in particular, but being more insular and having more of these tariff barriers in place.
Okay. Which is a great macro conversation. I mean, having spoken to so many, business leaders, I think I'll echo what you said, Aaron, which is that there's a macro shift going on, which is not a short-term thing. And the trade imbalance, they're kind of at least two of them at a high level. There's a US-China one, and then there's a Europe-China one. And I think certainly from the administration's perspective, both of those are relevant conversations, and we'll dig into more about what they mean for everybody else. So Kevin, lots of containers on the water. Liberation Day comes. Oh my God, what does Kevin do?
It's so dynamic. Even if we had this webinar 2 weeks ago, the topics would have been completely different. The urgencies of prioritizations would have been different. So let's take a step back. Prior to a few weeks ago, When the tariffs were around 140+%, for a CPG seller that is importing goods from overseas to sell on various e-commerce channels like, Amazon, Walmart, Target, etc. Here's a real tangible situation from just a few weeks ago, right? Let's say I have a container. It's got $100,000 of goods in that container, right? The tariff that I'm responsible for to bring that into the U.S. port is $140,000 for an additional cost that has to be bared. Now multiply that by having 10 containers. That's $1.4 million. How do companies just magically come up with $1.5 million to bring 10 containers in? It's that's the gravity. We could look at the percentages and stuff like as we're talking about, but it's really dollars and cents. Of course, I bring it in, then I have to sell it at a much higher price to recoup. A lot of these omni-channel brands, the margins are very thin. So, it's a very challenging situation. Now, that was a few weeks ago. What is it now? Well, the tariffs are a little bit lower, around 30%. Same situation still apply. Now, these containers that are on the water have a different tariff structure. Now, what do we do? The stuff that's on the water, we'll talk about bonded warehouses and things of that a little bit later. But companies and supply chains have built-in workarounds for that scenario from a few weeks ago. Now everything has to get reshuffled. It's just the situation is very dynamic. I think the folks that will succeed in this are the ones that are very cost conscious, have a good understanding of their costs, and are also nimble. It's like the container ship analogy. If you got a big boat, it turns very slowly. But if you're nimble, you're able to find these gaps, these opportunities, and pivot very quickly. So, I think those are some of the things we'll talk about in a few more minutes.
Oh, we will. That's fantastic. So let's go back to Maya. Maya, what have people been doing over the last 6-8 weeks to deal with this unprecedented change?
Calling all of us, upping all of us and charging, we're charging them for therapy, right? To Aaron's point. Look, everybody's been literally braced with white knuckles, trying to find out candidly how much they could de-risk their position for a period of time, right? It's been a lot of, hey, wait a minute, I can rejigger a whole lot of expensive things to rejigger, or I can white knuckle this, hop into a deferred tax warehouse and hedge and place some bets that this world is going to change, which we saw the first instantiation of that last week. I think there's some best practices we can surface. So Adam, if you wanna kindly pop up, I think it was slide 3. So in addition to the white knuckling and reaching out to smart friends to help with just listening and venting, I think what we're seeing a lot of folks is, what COVID did to this for consumers to know this term called supply chain. Trump and this latest H1 2025 together is really doing to tariff and kind of by proxy compliance, right? So I think I couldn't agree more with Aaron's lens. We also believe this is a permanent shift. And when you have a permanent shift, the new name of the game, candidly, is compliance. So what does compliance start with? You better always be ready with 6 and 10 digit HS codes. Like you're now not getting in any back doors via 321 and being able to skirt kind of the cheap and fast pass lane. So that classification has got to be an always on thing. Frequently to date, it's been a manual exercise. Brokers have been doing it. We're now in the name of the game of always on, which means you've got to have tech and automation. I think back to my earlier point, there's been a lot of white knuckling. How can we hedge and hopefully get things to change? I also think the smart brands are actually starting to really genuinely step back, carve out time, and do what I call the hard math, right? So calculate those end-to-end costs from your centers of supply to your centers of demand, ideally with some scenario planning or testing on what ranges of tariffs of impact could mean, and really candidly looking at their supply chain and where they place inventory differently. We used to live in a really centralized supply chain world where something would go from China to the US in a very simple model and then the US outbound. and get globally distributed. There's a whole lot of shifting now by going from China or your manufacturer in Asia to your centers of demand, meaning directly to the EU, directly to the UK, directly to Canada, etc. You got to manage trade like a pro, right? These 3-2-1 fast track lanes are going bye-bye. So in addition to being always on compliance ready, get partners that can make this stuff sail through for you. And ideally take the risk off your plate, right? Being an importer of record means you get anything wrong with customs, you're looking at jail time, massive penalties and fines, and risking being barred from importing again. Like, this is kind of a big deal, right? Wherever you can get guaranteed landed costs, right? Duties, taxes, and fees, take that risk off your shoulders. And for anybody that's listening that's riding the postal, so if you're importing or exporting using the postal rails, my suspicion is what we've just lived through together in H1. You're going to start, and we've already seen it with postal coming into the United States. Those postal DDU rails are going to get materially ground out. So I think the accessibility and the availability is going to become too expensive for compliance, and it's going to be a DDP game. Look, you got to build trust with consumers at checkout. Adam, if you kindly pop back a slide, the rest of the world outside of America is used to checkouts that look like this, right? Duties, taxes, fees, and local currency. That is not what Americans have been used to. So if you flip back, the new world with all this volatility is going to start to look like all of those costs being baked in to the product price at checkout, right? So have partners that really can optimize that pricing of duties, taxes, and fees at checkout to build trust and conversion with your consumers. And then lastly, we are seeing, any single carrier dependency or strategy, just like we learned, during COVID for domestic, multi-carrier is the way to go. It's now even more true with H1 2025 and all the compliance. So you guys have seen DHL Express 3 weeks ago couldn't bring stuff into the States that was less than $2,500. Like, they literally paused service. So make sure you've got risk off your plate with multiple choices.
That's great. So Aaron, I'm going to come to you. So you obviously got a lot of calls from people pulling their hairs out, and they're relying on you to give them advice, not only for the short term, but what are you saying to people as you look forward? Like, how should they plan for the next year? How should they plan for the year after that? And how are you helping form people's ideas around the way they should optimize their businesses forward?
Yeah, the first way I start is to kind of help acknowledge the moment that they're in. And there's a Swedish proverb that I absolutely love that I think you've probably heard it before from me, but it's that every ship has a good captain in calm weather. And really what that tries to illustrate is that these are the moments when things are volatile. It's not super clear in a spreadsheet what you should do. You can't ask ChatGPT how to fix a problem. These are the moments where you start to figure out if you've got a world-class operation or if you've got people who are not quite there, right? And so, a lot of the calls that I got were honestly talking people out of doing dumb decisions, right? Like, when tariffs come up, it's 145%, like, I got to sell my business. I got to fire everybody. I'm not going to order anymore. I'm like, okay, well, do you think this is how it's going to be forever? No. Well, then why are you acting like this? Why are you making a forever decision? And so you try to kind of walk through and break those things that way. But again, if I think longer term pieces here, and the reason I start with that part of the moment we're in is somebody has to take a bet, right? You have to make an educated guess. I can't tell you that. You can't tell them that. It has to be that business who has a perspective of what the future could look like, and then they work forward and go toward that. The framework that I tell people is that you need to be confident that you're making decisions today that you won't regret in 6 weeks from now or 6 years from now. Maybe it's not the best idea to spend $100 million to build a factory in the US if we think that tariffs are going to go away in 6 months or 4 years or things like that. And so this is really about making sure that you understand all the different options and things you could do, running those down to understand the costs, the trade-offs, etc. And then don't walk through any one-way doors, right? Be okay with your decision regardless of if the facts on the ground change. And if you start to do that, you'll find that the companies that took this advice continue to produce with their factories in China, even while tariffs were at 145%, because they wanted to avoid the bullwhip effect. They knew that they were going to need that inventory in order to sell, and now they're in a much stronger position than if they were on the phone last week going, "Hey, buddy, you know how I ran away and said we weren't going to produce anymore? Actually, I need like 1,000 units or 1,000% tomorrow. Can you do that?" And so you just have to think through all those sorts of things and really be comfortable with that framework.
No, that's so true, because I remember at the beginning we had like people doing, canceling orders, storing stuff in Shenzhen or so somewhere else in China, scrambling for bonded warehouses, scrambling for, FTZs. And so we saw all of the above. And we had companies who literally ended up paying some of those tariffs that, Kevin mentioned them. Some of them have publicly put this out, like, hey, we had a container coming, 80,000 hit with $120,000-$30,000 of tariffs, so we're going to lose our shirt on these. So, Kevin, you've been living this. What have you guys been doing?
Yeah.
How did you think about it at the beginning? How are you thinking about it now? And what are you doing now? And how are you planning for? We're going to talk a little bit about the future, and some questions already coming in.
Yeah. So, we have to take a step back. For me, I have to look at the segments of the supply chain, because there's optimizations in each of those segments. Let's start off with, our sourcing and procurement. The factories in China, they're coming up with opportunities to move manufacturing to other countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, et cetera. Of course, there's a cost associated with it, right? Raw material now has to go from China to those countries, tooling, et cetera. Starting up a new product in a brand new factory, there's going to be quality, potential quality issues, right? As a CPG company, you're not going to find out about those things until it lands in the U.S. and the consumer gets it. So there's a lot of inherent risk and costs associated with it. But a lot of companies are diversifying. They're finding other sources of manufacturing, other countries to manufacture from, or building redundancies. They have multiple manufacturers for the same types of SKUs in different parts of the country. So that's, hedging your bet. If the China tariff goes up and another country's tariff stays down, you could actually move your production, or percentages of your production, so to rebalance it. Having that option is good versus a single source, and then not having the opportunity to make any changes. Another thing to look at is new types of SKUs. A lot of companies that sell on omni-channel, they're looking at sourcing goods in the U.S. Of course, unfortunately, there's not a lot of production capacity for some of the stuff that's sourced from China in the U.S. currently. That may or may not change in the future, but there are things that are made in the U.S., consumables, things of that sort, beauty, et cetera. Those are categories that, certain CPG sellers are now looking at. Do we shift our investments into those types of products? If you already are a good Amazon seller and you have those channel capabilities, you could pivot into other types of SKUs, other categories, if it makes sense, at the end of the day. Other things that companies are looking at is, is looking at different ways to bring in the products, different Incoterms, right? DDP engineering is something that's been around for a while. A lot of factories are offering to do the customs, but now you're put, as we talked about, you're inheriting more risks by doing that. So that's another thing that's on the table. So that's one segment on the sourcing and procurement. Another big pillar is on the logistics side, bringing goods into the U.S. right? Working with factories, manufacturers, using their DDP terms versus your own FOB terms and your own BCO contracts. Those are, once again, different ways to do the same thing, but you want to diversify. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. The other thing that's real interesting is that there's a lot of containers coming into the U.S. In the next 30, 60, 90 days. That's going to cause a lot of concerns. We're already seeing container prices doubling, and tripling in to different parts of the country. And a lot of companies are understanding that we have a little bit of a optimization in tariffs today. They want to bring in as much as possible. Some companies are going to bring in the entire years with the inventory if they can, to further de-risk any situations later this year. All of that. Supply chain is really about balance. Once you create this wave, this surge, that surge propagates downstream. So the vast number of containers that are coming in is going to clog up the ports. Your drayage providers are going to be at capacity, which means your costs are going to go up, intermodal is going to be expensive, trucking is expensive, warehouses are going to run out of space. So now it's always about this, equilibrium and disequilibrium. And as I said earlier, the companies that are able to rebalance and get to that equilibrium faster are going to be at advantage. Real quickly, the other segments, in terms of managing supply chain operations, there's also planning, sales and operations planning. These disturbances will force companies and are forcing companies to redo their entire annual planning, very quickly. And then these models are constantly changing. It's telling these companies, hey, you cannot sell the SKU anymore, or this category is dead. Now you got to focus here. Those types of decisions are going to propagate throughout the organization and cause all sorts of problems. And then, the other thing, two more things real quick, Mo, is that, tech is very important, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't have good tech and understand your supply chain, you can't pivot very quickly, as I've been talking about earlier. It's the companies that are doing things on spreadsheets where it takes weeks to do a certain business process. They're the ones that are going to suffer. If you have real-time data, strong APIs, able to aggregate inventory, manage your order orchestration and operations, you're going to be much more nimble and be at an advantage. And then the last thing I'll add is, in my previous career, I did a lot around continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma, Master Black Belt at a lot of different companies, including Amazon and Microsoft. And I firmly believe, I've seen, cycles in the business where, these types of, situations occur, and companies, they reinvest in continuous improvement, not just in supply chain, but all different parts of their operations. And I think this is another, cycle where if the tariffs are increasing and it's reducing your margin, you have to find ways to cost save, to get those percentages that went into your COGS out through efficiencies and things of that sort. Lean Six Sigma, it's really about looking at waste. What are the types of waste in your organization? And, inventory, for some folks in the period of production system, inventory is considered a waste. You don't want to hold inventory. You want to get the inventory and then get it to your customer, and then, create that cash flow. So this importance of continuous improvement during these times is, I think, going to be paramount, especially for those companies that are successful.
Oh, that's great. And I know you echoed kind of what Aaron said, which is this thing around don't make rash decisions. So you don't need to cancel all of your orders at the beginning. Cancel some of them, hold some of them, ship some of them. This kind of moderate view, I think, has benefited a lot of folks. And I think the point you made around kind of huge spike in demand on the shipping lines, right? It's pretty obvious, which is this 10% thing. People are thinking this might actually be a good deal compared to what comes next, which could be 30, it could be 40, it could be 50, which could be troubling. So one question for any of you that wants to answer this is Europe. Now, obviously, that's a big market. The EU is a big market, and many brands are thinking about getting into the EU. Obviously, there's no tariffs, at least today, between China and EU. Thoughts? Should brands be thinking about going into Europe, shipping directly? Hey, container goes to Europe, Hamburg, instead of coming to LA. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Should people be doing that?
Yeah, I think where we're going to end up is, if you fast forward 5 or 10 years from now, I think we're going to have multiple ecosystems of supply chains and markets. And so, whereas Maya was talking about, it used to be China to everywhere, it's now going to be China to Australia and Mexico to the US and maybe Romania to the rest of the EU. And I think that you're going to find that there will be smaller MOQs, smaller types of producers that give you the resiliency that you need, not only in case of a tariff war that goes on, but in case of any sort of outcome, whether it be natural, man-made, those sorts of things that can cause your supply chain to be so brittle that it breaks.
Perfect. Well, that's a great one. So source supply from many places. So Maya, what do you think? Should we be setting up shop in Europe?
Look at your demand math. If you have significant demand in Europe and you do the end-to-end costing that I mentioned earlier, absolutely. So Adam, because I'm a visual gal, if you could throw up the slides one more time, building on Aaron's point, we're moving from this centralized Asia, US outbound, this guy, right, to the next slide, which is Asia to those demand centers, right? You go to Europe to access EMEA. You have an APAC distribution hub for APAC. You go to the US to get to Canada. So that is absolutely, I couldn't agree more. That is where we're going. And candidly, I'm seeing the smart brands literally in a quarter already doing this. But do the math, make sure, receive, store, pick, pack, ship, including the import, fuel, and duties and taxes. Do those math equations to make sure the P&L can stand in a happy place for Europe alone.
Yeah, I would just add too that it's not as if you just decide that, oh, I'm going to sell in Europe today and people are lining up to buy your product. They are different markets, right? There's different languages, there's different phrasing and things like that. And so it does take work. And I think the worst thing that a brand can do is just throw up something and halfway go into Europe or any other market and not really do it well.
Yeah, I was assuming you were in Europe. It's a great point. Like if you're opening up Europe for the first time, first of all, it's got a single currency, not language, to Aaron's point, right? So, and they're very, very different regulations still. So yes, unlocking Europe is a different set of considerations. But if you're there and your demand can justify holding inventory there, I'm seeing a lot of brands do that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I have some real world experience in this, not just the EU, but UK. There's Brexit, so you almost have to replicate it. But for an Amazon seller, what's the largest Amazon after the US? You got Amazon UK, you got Amazon Germany, you got Amazon Japan. When you sell goods on Amazon, that ASIN and all the reviews, if your account is in good standing, it's replicated in all these other Amazons. It makes sense for you to look at, launching your products in these other Amazon markets. I mean, I personally seen SKUs that, do 10% of US sales just months after launching in these other countries, because the reviews come over, the social proofing's there. But, Aaron, you bring up a good point. There's different language requirements, power requirements, et cetera, on products that you sell. Of course, you got to adhere to that. But it's a great strategy. If it costs you X% to import that product from China into the US, you could go from China to the UK and have a significantly less tariff profile, and then you already have a marketplace and you already have the fulfillment methods. It's an easy extra percentage in revenue and profit you can gain by going to the geographies. But once again, it has to be the right SKUs. There are certain things. Your marketplace team and your product team really have to think this out, but you can build a very strong roadmap for international expansion in these marketplaces. And
Kevin, you've done that. So any early results you can share or not?
Oh yeah, it's been very good. Some SKUs, we're seeing about 10% of U.S. sales, and the other thing that's interesting in the U.K., for example, Amazon UK, the U.K. is it's not the size of the U.S. I tell people it's like maybe the size of a California. You could actually have one warehouse in the middle of the country, and you could fulfill 1 or 2 days in the entire UK. In terms of parcel cost, it's significantly less than what I pay in the US for similar types of delivery. It's a whole different economics of supply chain there. And if you set it up right and you get the right partners in place, I mean, it's very successful. It's something that I think a lot of sellers that are on Amazon should look at, is that international expansion opportunity.
Yeah, in a webinar of doom and gloom that we've kicked off with, I just want to put a spotlight on what Kevin's saying, right? So, e-commerce platforms like Shopify and Global Payments, or Stripe's Global Payments, when that infrastructure is there, it is really easy, to Kevin's point, to turn on new markets. And at FlavorCloud, we just pushed a report on consumer insights. You absolutely see 140, 160% growth in a lot of those long tail markets. Think a lot of Middle Eastern world. So when you have the rails, the demand is still there.
I guess, Maya, that was the interesting thing I saw in your report last week or the week before. And of course, on the back of that, you had Jensen and various other people going to Saudi and UAE, various other places. So everybody else can follow. That's kind of the lesson here. So with that, we're going to start taking some other questions as well. So predictions for non-China 3-to-1 policy. So I think most people think China 3-to-1 is probably dead for good. What do people think about other places? Is it dead for other places or not? What is the prediction?
I think it's dead.
It's totally dead, right? We make China work. We can turn it off for the rest of the world. We want the tax revenue, right?
Yes, it's I guess violent agreement from the panelists on that.
Violent agreement.
I would also add too that if part of this trade policy is to bring jobs back to the United States, it's going to be very difficult to bring manufacturing jobs back, but you can bring a lot of warehousing jobs back. That's something that is a little bit easier to do. And so this is a very potent thing. It's basically a bipartisan issue at this point, where they say, hey, Shein and Temu, we don't like that. We want this revenue, and we can bring jobs back to my district. Yeah, let's get rid of it.
No, exactly. And that's a really interesting thing, by the way, you mentioned, Aaron, because Pipe 17 used by brands, retailers, but also by 3PLs. So we had a lot of interest from 3PLs. And if you look at less drop ship from outside the US, and if you assume people are going to continue to buy the same volume of stuff, means that those things have to be fulfilled from the US. So hopefully it will drive at least some sustainable jobs and some sustainable business on the 3PL side, which is interesting. Okay, Aaron, you mentioned this. I'm going to ask you, Temu and Shein, dead in the US?
In their current form, yes. I think that you're already starting to see this, where I think Shein is only selling US-made products, or maybe it's Temu. They're moving away. Temu dropped from number 2, number 3 app in the App Store to number 90 just in a couple of weeks. So they pulled back all their marketing spend. I think that those businesses will exist, but they'll be very, very different in the future.
Yeah, I know that.
You got to throw Amazon Haul in there, Mo.
What is that?
Yeah, exactly. Fair enough. I don't think they're dead. I think Aaron's right. I think they're on a pause right now. They're retooling. If you take a $6, $8, $10 product and double it or even triple it, there's still a consumer market there. So I think they're figuring out their merchandising. I think they're figuring out their, to your point, Mo, logistics infrastructure to house inventory here. But I would expect to see them roaring again in a different lens.
Interesting. Okay. Should people think about moving manufacturing out of China for good?
Yes.
Say more.
Oh, this is going to be good.
So I think that you need to have at least a China plus one policy.
Okay.
And so now that is much easier said than done. China is fantastic at producing so many things. And there are some things that you can only get in China at the quantities and at the quality that companies need. Athleisure is a great example. Something like 90% of all athleisure comes from China, with a little bit coming from Vietnam or Thailand or India. And so the supply chain is just such that it's there. That being said, if what we've talked about is resiliency in your supply chain, you need different options. And so you can continue to produce from China, but you sure as heck better have a backup in some other country, probably another part of the world in general, in case something were to happen geopolitically, environmentally, things like that make it untenable.
I was talking to a brand Friday before the interim pause, 90-day pause was announced. And, the CEO basically told me, look, nowhere else has the machinery that I need. And by the way, Nike and all these other people have already gone into all the other geos and have basically snapped up all the production capacity. So I'm, it's $100 million business. I'm no way going to be able to do what we need to do.
It's the machinery. It's the talent, right? If anybody listened to Barry Weiss, she just interviewed the guy that wrote the book on Apple supply chain.
Yeah.
China has 300 to 500 million humans that rotate between manufacturers for their jobs. I forget what they're called. We don't understand the scale in this country that China has. So, Aaron, I agree with you 100%. It should be China plus one. You made a comment earlier that I totally agree with, which is if you go China and Vietnam, for example, those Vietnamese factories over time might become China owned. So then this even gets more interesting. But, for all of us to think China is easily replaceable, we don't know how to think in the billions of terms at scale like they do. So they've got an entire nation the size of the United States of America, every single human, including children, that's just simply a rotating workforce for manufacturing.
Which is compelling.
Yeah. So, if we can, I want to go back to the comment you made around, Nike and everybody soaking things up. you're right. The lowest hanging fruit is going to be soaked up by the biggest guys. But we just had a couple of examples on Sourcify front that is showing that things are a little bit different. We've got one client that we're talking to. They do hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. They've got a 50-person sourcing team in China. They're like, we're stuck. We don't know where to go. Within about a week, we found folks in India, Dominican Republic, Mexico, Turkey, Morocco. And so part of this is just knowing who to ask and how to ask and go through and do that. So that's the first part is who can make it today. But I think there's also another part here where it comes to, yes, machinery and tooling will need to be changed. You're not looking for a vertical ramp up in most cases, but someone who is producing, I don't know, patio equipment can probably also produce grills or fire pits or things like that. And so part of this is understanding those relationships and helping evolve those suppliers. It will take time. And to Maya's point, that scale that is China is not going to be replicated anywhere else. And so you're going to have to put in a little bit more work to find and qualify and retain your factory.
Just be creative. So Kevin, how are you thinking about this question? You're on mute. So maybe we come back to you if it's a computer problem. Yeah, you might have to come back to you. Okay. So while Kevin is coming back, so are the shelves going to be empty at Christmas? Are we going to have less dolls to buy?
I don't think so. I think where the pause came in and the dramatic drawdown in the pause is such that you can ship in most of your holiday stuff now. No. And so I think that Trump saved Christmas from himself, and so there's a lot of stuff that's going to be able to come through, and things will be more expensive. But I don't think that you'll end up in a situation where people are just sending out warm fuzzies and handmade gifts for Christmas.
Okay, so no excuses then for not sending presents.
No, always looking for the angle.
It will be yours is in the post already, Maya. Kevin, do you want to go back to your manufacturing question? Oh,
still mute.
You might need to rejoin.
I think Christmas is on the shelves. I want to build on what Kevin said earlier, which we're all seeing, which is demand forecasting right now is really fuzzy. Yeah. So it's okay, we'll make it through Christmas, but you've got major public companies right now coming out saying, I can't give you guidance. And brands and retailers are in the same boat. So I do expect there potentially to be risk post-Christmas with exactly what we want when we want it being on the shelves, just because no one can see through what the macroeconomic forecast or economy is going to look like in the States.
Yeah. And especially because we don't know after this 90-day period what things are going to look like.
Right.
And therefore long-term how things are going to be. There was a point that was mentioned, which is Aaron mentioned, things are going to be a little bit more expensive. How are you guys thinking about general overall consumer demand? I mean, consumer demand has been one of the biggest drivers of the US economy. I mean, certainly going back to the dot-com boom bust, and continuing through GFC, etc. Do you think this pricing pressure is going to have impact on people's ability to buy? And how should people in the audience who operate brands or 3PLs think about that?
My perspective is I think that the impulse buy is going to become a endangered species. I think that people are going to be much more intentional about what they buy, and they're going to pay a lot more attention to reviews. They're going to pay a lot more attention to certifications or things like that, because they may only be able to buy a handful of things, whereas in the past they're just like, yeah, whatever, add it, it shows up tomorrow, I don't like it, no big deal. And I think that we talked about Temu and Shein earlier. That was their business model, was it is so cheap, if it doesn't fit quite right, it's okay, throw it away, buy a new one. And I think that is what's going to go away.
Disposable fashion, goodbye, which is probably good for the environment anyway, so yeah. That could be a good thing. Kevin, are you back?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Oh, perfect. Yes.
Okay.
What are you going to do with all your manufacturing?
We're talking about the pricing, right? We've already, started testing different price points, and it's very interesting. Between like our competitors, they have different supply chains, they have different sourcing, different costs, inherent costs. Now it's out of rebalance. Before, the competitive landscape was, let's say, within this, plus or minus $100 window. Now it's plus or minus 125, 150. For a consumer, that product may not be worth $150, right? So now it's changing. And then the competitors that are left in that range, they have different pricing structures. So now the seller that was maybe the lower volume seller is becoming a higher volume seller. So there's all of this rebalancing that's happening in that landscape. It's really interesting. It's just not the tariffs, but the impact of the tariffs. What's your MOQ? What is the factory going to charge you now versus later? All of these things are going to tie into rebalancing of who is getting the predominant sales in that category. And then the other thing, before I lost my microphone, is that the tariffs on raw materials. In terms of bringing goods into the U.S. We're looking at finished goods. We're looking at potentially making some of our wooden products in the U.S. But to get the bamboo, wood, and products, raw material from China to the U.S., that also has a huge tariff associated with it. So even this opportunity to change manufacturing from China to another country or the U.S., it has this whole new level of complexity that has not been really thought through. Of course, you need factories, but you also need to import these raw material to make the goods. So that's another whole new level of thing that is going to come after this initial round of tariffs.
Indeed. So we're kind of coming to the tail end of this. So AI, is there any role for AI in navigating this tariff mayhem in the future? Do you guys think about that or no? Or is it too rubber meets the road for today?
One of the things, Mo, you and I have been talking about in the past is sort of this headless AI marketplace, right? This is sort of on the cutting edge and coming in the future. But I always think about, if I'm selling on these channels and I have to pay 15% on these marketplaces, I want to sell it on Shopify at the lowest cost to me and highest profit. But the discoverability piece, I think there's going to be this transformation of people finding our products, not only on Amazon, but AI-driven discoverability on Shopify and other channels that are lower cost. Now I could recoup some of that tariff, right? I think it's going to be even more important. This cost consciousness, the companies that are able to use tech and continuous improvement to lower their costs are going to kind of climb to the top in terms of their sales.
That's a great one. Maybe that's an area of margin improvement for businesses, which is, people who sell on these marketplaces can give away up to half the money, half the dollar that comes in if you take fulfillment in. Good. So final question. What is the one piece of advice you guys have for the audience as they're thinking about planning their businesses? And many of them operate businesses that you guys advise or operate or work with.
I think many operators that have grown up in a world where they've built literally conveyor belts optimized to the nth degree to move and source cheap stuff and get it to a big demand center like the US and then out. I think that paradigm is massively changing. COVID started this, so the good news is it's not starting now in H1 25. It started a couple of years ago, but I think the spirit of optimizing for resilience over pure cost down to the nano penny is going to be a tremendous shift for a lot of companies. So I think back to what I said earlier, like this is now a game of resilience over perfection at the cost optimization level.
That's fantastic. Kevin,
yeah,
what's your one piece of advice?
I'm just going to echo what Maya just said. It's really about continuous improvement, cost reduction, and doing it in a structured way. I just came from that kind of background, Lean Six Sigma. To me, there's a right way to do continuous improvement and cost reduction, and then sort of the wrong way. And I think companies that are progressive, they got to go back to look at the history. These continuous improvement business practices have been around. They just go up and down in terms of the cycles of the industry, but I think they got to relook at, potentially looking at a, workforce that is going to be focused and doing a proper way of doing continuous improvement to, improve their enterprise.
Fantastic. Aaron?
I would completely agree with what Maya and Kevin have said. I think supply chain optimization is dead. It's now supply chain optionality is the key thing. I guess that the main piece of advice I would add is that I think that founders and operators need to recognize that their success criteria for their role has changed. And it used to be that you were bonused, you were promoted by squeezing and grinding things out to be the most cost efficient possible. And now today, your role as a COO, as a founder, is to understand the trade-offs and to educate the rest of the business in terms of, if we go down option A, here are the doors that open and here are the doors that close. If we go into option B, here are the doors that open, here's the doors that close. And it's really your job is to provide the trade-offs and help the business collectively make a decision, as opposed to, this is the lowest price, and we go through and do that. And I think that if there's something that is super easy to understand in a spreadsheet and you're waiting for something just to pencil out, those are the types of jobs that are going to go away, and they're going to be automated by AI. And so really, when it comes to what does it mean to be a founder, what does it mean to be a COO or a VP of ops, it's your ability to take imperfect information and to make a educated guess and be able to stand by either outcome that comes through.
And not to hallucinate like AI does.
Yeah.
So, look, at this stage, I'd love to thank you. Amazing panel, amazing dialogue, a lot of really great comments in the chat. Really appreciate your time. Hopefully the audience will be able to reach out to you guys if they have any questions or if they need any help. So with that, I'd like to thank you and hand back to Adam to close off. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, what an amazing session. I learned a lot. Really honored to have you all here. For those on the broadcast, I will be sending out a recording of the session to you all, including a complimentary copy of our ebook on the same topics with some of the same insights. Thank you all for joining us. Everyone have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.